We look back at a week in which we've seen flooding like never before.
The storms Ciara and Dennis have left us in uncharted territory. We're live across the West Midlands looking at the impact on our communities.
Meanwhile, the number of severe flood warnings across the Midlands has started to fall.
I've been in a helicopter to see the scale of the devastation. This is the scene above Worcestershire.
We look at the human cost. I've been speaking to those whose homes have been destroyed and lives ruined.
And we've seen floodwaters ebb and flow over the past few days. Unfortunately, the one thing the computer models do agree on is that we will see more rain.
Good evening. A fortnight of torrential rain has seen floodwaters at the highest levels in 20 years in places. At one point, there were 7 severe flood warnings issued in England. 6 of those were in the Midlands. A woman from Birmingham died after being swept away by floodwater near Tenbury Wells. And a man is in a serious condition in hospital after falling into the Severn in Worcester. Elsewhere, businesses, schools and more than 1,000 homes have been left underwater. Some people who were just getting back on their feet after the floods of October have been hit again. Our environment correspondent Charlotte Cross looks back at what's been a desperately heartbreaking week for so many.
The rain came down and the floods came up. Across the region, the sense that this was worse than it's ever been before.
Levels are unprecedented.
The highest they've seen in 20 years.
I have never, ever seen such devastation with the floods.
It's got worse. It's much worse than it was before.
This is the highest I've ever seen the River Wye in Hereford.
It was a lot worse this time round.
And the figures back that up. In Hereford on Monday, gauges recorded 700 tonnes of water per second under the Old Wye Bridge. The previous record was 574. Hundreds of people have seen their homes submerged.
Gutted. You don't like seeing your house underwater.
Many have been evacuated from their homes. Others felt they had no choice but to stay put.
We're all right till sort of probably tomorrow, and then we'll have to just make a decision on what we're going to do.
I've got too many animals to move out, mate. I've got 4 chickens in my bath at the moment.
And in Worcestershire, one woman even lost her life. Yvonne Booth from Birmingham went missing near Tenbury Wells, swept away by the floodwater. Her body was found a day later. As Storm Dennis struck, 111 millimetres of rain fell in 2 days. That's more than twice the normal level of 50 millimetres for the month. But it's not just rainfall in our region which contributes to the problem. After similar deluges in Wales, the water comes along the River Wye in Herefordshire and along the River Severn through Shropshire, Worcestershire and Gloucestershire. Now the clean-up operation begins, as questions turn to what the future might hold.
It's very clear that our weather patterns are changing. We're getting more intense rainfall, warmer winters, leading to greater flooding, more severe floods, more frequent flooding, so clearly it's something we're going to have to deal with going forward.
Well, this week, both the River Severn, which is behind me, and the River Wye reached their highest levels ever. And with the ground already saturated from such a wet winter, there was simply nowhere for the water to go. I've been up in a helicopter to see just how much of the Midlands is underwater. This whole week we've seen unprecedented levels of flooding, and we've seen that affect most of our towns and cities. It is a beautiful day, and so we've got some lovely clear shots of exactly how much flooding has occurred in this region. The pictures you can see now are the River Severn. It is 220 miles long. We are on our way to Shrewsbury, and already you can see it's certainly burst its banks and it has flooded. We're just going over the main bridge in Shrewsbury, and you can see just how high those river levels are. The iconic landmark of the Midlands Iron Bridge itself, which was underwater earlier this week. Now, the Environmental Agency had already said that they wouldn't be able to protect everybody because of the sheer scale of flooding that had taken place. You can also see those blue flood defences along the River Severn, and we know that earlier this week homes and businesses were evacuated because those have been breached. We're now in Bewdley, and you can see that the Severn Valley Railway is running alongside the River Severn. It's pretty much flooded here as well. Caravan parks again underwater. And once again, we've got car parks submerged. We're just hovering over Stourport, and you can see a lot of the flooding that's taken place here throughout this week. We're still on our way to Worcester, and actually en route we've just seen this lock which seems to have merged with the river. It is quite incredible to see the racecourse here in Worcester so submerged, because it literally is unrecognisable. And it's not only the racecourse here in Worcester. We know the cricket ground is submerged, the town itself. In fact, it's hard to see which parts of this area haven't been affected by the flooding. Well, Worcester is behind us. We're heading down the river, and as we go further and further along, it's very easy to see where the river should be, and in fact where it is now. Great swathes of the countryside are absolutely submerged. We're just going past Upton upon Severn. The whole area looks like an island that's been cut off completely, and it's really difficult to see how people are getting in and out, because from here it looks like most of those roads are cut off. We've headed west from Tewkesbury over the Malvern Hills, and we're now in Hereford, where the River Wye was at its highest level ever during this week. All sorts of areas are submerged, and it's just a really sorry picture of how badly affected the region has been.
Well, some incredible pictures above Herefordshire there in Samina's report. Let's just give you an idea from the ground of just how high the Wye rose here in Hereford. Over my shoulder, hopefully you can see the two bridges that cross the Wye into Hereford. The level of the river is still high actually, but let's just give you an idea of how high it rose. I'm at the rowing club here in Hereford, and if you wander over to this door, you can just get a sense of how high the water came. There's the dirty brown mark to where the levels of the water came. Obviously bad enough for leisure facilities like the rowing club here, but the houses behind me also mostly underwater, as was the street as well. We'll show you some of those pictures in a moment. But as the woman who owns one of the houses behind me told me yesterday, the flooding is just where the story begins. And I've been filming in some communities where people have been trying to begin at least to put their lives back together. Somewhere through yet more rain and behind the emergency barriers is Homer C of E Academy. They're over a mile away from the River Wye, but on Sunday night they were breached and 75% of the school was left underwater. Outside, the pumping continues, but it's inside where the real damage is, and the race is on to make at least some of it habitable for when the children come back from half-term on Tuesday.
This is the year 5-6 block, so the water on Sunday morning was over Whalley Height in here. You can see that the whole place has had to be cleared. Teaching resources that we was able to salvage, we've salvaged, stripped out the whole place. People working in here are teaching assistants, office staff who volunteered to come in their holidays to make sure that they can get all the resources ready, and that we can get new classrooms set up for the children. You looked at it and thought, how on earth are we going to get this right and get it right in a week? We're probably not going to be up and running again in our old normal until September. However, next week we'll create a new normal and have the children back.
Just over a mile away is Greyfriars Avenue. It was one of the worst hit areas in the city. This is what it looked like on Monday. The Fuller family are returning home for the first time since the flood. They've been living in rented accommodation since the last time they were hit back in October. And now, with the renovation works well underway, they've been hit again.
This is just so worse than the first time. So worse than the first time. Before we had relatively clear water, but it's lifted all the floor. This has all been put down by the insurance company to protect the old floor underneath, the tile floor. That's all been lifted. There's still, look at it in there.
And it wasn't just a home. Roger and Polly also ran it as a B&B, which means they've also lost their livelihood. And they feel let down.
The only way to come back here, the only way to do it is we have to reimagine. I don't want to hear that, oh, you live next to the river, what do you expect? The Houses of Parliament are built next to a river and they're protected with the Thames flood barrier. We just need to protect the citizens. No more vanity projects. Let's work out how we can protect our domestic housing stock and infrastructure first.
4 miles outside Hereford, in the village of Hampton Bishop, has been cut off for days. The emergency services and even the army have been delivering supplies to people there all week. So too has Chris Roberts, who's been working flat out. Well, as flat out as you can in a tractor through a flood.
I've been doing it for 12, 14 hours. 14 hours yesterday. And I've just been bringing supplies into the care home, helping the community out. Yeah.
So what you've been providing is literally a lifeline then, particularly to the people in the care home?
I wouldn't say that. It's just doing what we got to do, really, you know.
So why do it?
My grand's actually in the Hampton House care home, so we've got to keep it open for them.
Yes, good on Chris Roberts, doing an amazing job there in Hampton Bishop. And we do know that there are still 2 severe flood warnings actually there. So how do we better protect our communities along the riverbanks? Because experts say it's not just about the flood defences. Well, we're joined by Heather Shepherd from the National Flood Forum. Heather, thank you for joining us. Now, I know you live in Shrewsbury and I know you have been flooded, so you know what it's like. Thankfully, this occasion you've been spared. But how do we better protect our communities?
Well, I think we need to look at this in a more holistic way. So right up in the top of the catchments, how we can slow water coming down, but also to think about good drain maintenance and asset maintenance, along with what people can do personally. And we really need to stop building on floodplains. There's a fabulous picture at the moment out there of the floodplains of Shropshire doing their job, and that's what we need.
Yes, and that's what we saw earlier on actually from the helicopter, that those floodplains weren't able to cope with the rain and certainly the flooding that we've seen. We're at Ironbridge. This is a World Heritage Site. We don't want areas like this flooded. So what does the government need to do?
Well, the government have got a particular criteria called cost-benefit ratio, which adds up where the Environment Agency have to make a business case, a viable business case, to enable defences and enable different things to happen to reduce the risk of flooding in the area. But if you do not add up to this cost benefit, then the help is not there. You don't get the funding. Now, what's so incredible about Ironbridge is, as you say, this is a World Heritage Site. This has got precious things on site, museums with irreplaceable objects. And although we know that it's not a simple defence that can be put here, it's quite complex because of the geology of the area, actually it just means that it's more expensive. But really what we should be doing is looking further for money and protecting sites like this that are so vulnerable.
So you're saying looking further for money, not just locally, nationally, perhaps even internationally?
Yes, I mean we need a partnership way of doing it, but internationally perhaps as well. But also we need the government to be much more responsive to areas like this. This is, this attracts tourists. It's a wonderful area, and it's something that we really need to be investing in and protecting.
And just finally, we know climate change exists. We know that's what's contributing to the flooding that we've seen this week. We're more likely to see this in the future, aren't we?
We are, and I'm very concerned for our children and our children's children. We need to be we need a government that's much more proactive about planning for the future and less reactive when the floods are around. And really that would help enormously lots of different areas, particularly rural areas like this, and inner city areas that really suffer, mostly deprived areas, aren't they?
We're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much, Heather Shepherd, for joining us.
Thank you.
We need to point out really that the government has of course spent millions of pounds on flood defences in the Midlands over the years. We've seen them in action just this week, and about holding as well in places including Upton-on-Severn. But if we really are entering uncharted territory, are those defences still fit for purpose? Our political reporter Gareth Owen has visited 3 flood-hit communities in Shropshire where they're demanding the government does more.
For some, this flood feels different. The defences which have served Shropshire for 2 decades are now in question, as is the government response.
There was a very, very real prospect that the flood defences would fail here. And that isn't me saying that for dramatic effect. There was a real concern. And I think actually government ministers need to see that for themselves.
This is what Shrewsbury looked like a few days ago. Streets completely submerged.
Well, I grew up in Shrewsbury in the 80s and 90s, and those scenes were pretty familiar. It seemed to happen pretty much any time there was a sharp downpour. But then, in the early 2000s, they spent £3.5 million putting those things in. They're temporary flood defences. On this side is the River Severn. On the other side of that fence, the university centre, shops, businesses and homes.
And that system has worked well for part of the town. But all of the damage is now being done on the other side of the river.
All through the night, it's seeped through here.
Howard Jones runs a lighting company within sight of the barriers which defend his neighbours, but not him.
It's been abandoned, this side of the river. I think they could put some temporary barriers that they have in other towns that I've seen, but they don't do anything.
Downstream, another flood defence system, Ironbridge Gorge. But 4 nights ago, the water very nearly burst over the top. An historic global landmark under threat.
We're the only World Heritage Site in the Midlands. We need to look at ways in which we can permanently defend homes and communities, both where those temporary flood defences are now, but further afield too. I mean, it can't be right, can it, that the temporary solution in 2000 still is the temporary solution in 2020. There are schemes that are worked up, they are costed, and so if the government provided us the money, we can crack on and get them sorted.
But if some want to improve flood defences, further south in Bridge North, they'd just be grateful for any defences at all. In the Foster's Arms, they have 2 pumps running constantly to keep the pub clear. The landlord believes the town needs protecting.
Well, obviously it's not fair if you live by the river down here, but it just seems that we talk about it every time it happens, but then it gets forgotten about and nothing gets done.
And across the road, Amanda Olive runs a barber's shop. Over the years, the floods have been creeping closer to her business.
It's getting a lot closer, it's getting a lot higher, I think probably because of the climate change. And it is worrying because we can't get flood insurance.
Floods 20 years ago prompted a complete rethink of defences across this stretch of the River Severn. Will the floods of 2020 have the same effect? Gareth Owen, ITV News.
Well, council leaders from across Worcestershire have written to the Community Secretary today asking for more financial support. Well, there's also been mounting pressure, of course, on the Prime Minister to visit flood-hit communities. We asked the Environment Minister for an interview. She declined our request, but spoke to our ITV national colleagues a little earlier.
The Prime Minister is in touch. I mean, I'll probably call him after this interview. He's in constant touch. I'm his Floods Minister. He's got the Secretary of State for DEFRA who's been out and about all over the country. I've been out and about all over the country. It's absolutely terrible if you get flooded. But what I must say, of course, is because of the measures we've put in place over actually 20 years, successive governments, but increasing funding from this government, we've been able to put up flood defences which have better protected 200,000 homes.
Well, I'm joined now by Matthew Lawrence from the Environment Agency. Matthew, as we heard in that little clip we just played there, the flood defences have been put in place. The government is investing in areas, clearly not working everywhere. What more needs to be done?
Well, the government have pledged another £4 billion to spend on extra flood defences over the next 5 years, so that certainly help a lot of communities out there at risk from flooding.
We heard in our report a little bit earlier from the head teacher who said we're just going to have to get used to the new normal. Is it as simple as that, or should you be doing more?
Well, with climate change, this type of weather events is predicted, so it's something we might have to get used to and learn how to react and respond.
I mean, they're talked about as being, there used to be once in 100-year events. We've had 2 in the last 6 months. You can understand why people in cities like Hereford are getting thoroughly sick of it.
Yeah, certainly over the winter it seems to be flood after event after flood after event. So yeah, we just need to react for the future and learn how to cope.
Okay, so practically, what do you do?
So investing in flood defences is really important, but it's really important that people are aware of their flood risk and know how to respond accordingly. And we need to make sure that communities are resilient. So if you're unfortunate enough to get flooded, how do you get back in your homes quicker? So there's things like property resilience measures in place to enable you to get back quicker so people aren't left at their houses for 6 months or so.
Is it time then for a major top to bottom rethink of how we deal with these massive weather events?
We certainly need to learn from them. There's all sorts of measures in place, from natural flood management measures in the top of the catchments that's slowing down flows and protecting cities further down the catchments, to that investment in flood warning systems and getting people to be more resilient and know what to do in the event of floods.
OK, Matthew Lawrence from the Environment Agency, we have to leave it there, but thank you very much for talking to us this evening.
Thank you.
Well, we've certainly seen the impact the flooding has had on homes, schools and general everyday life. Businesses too are also picking up the pieces. Our business correspondent Mark Goff has spent the day in Tenbury Wells and Upton upon Severn, and people there want visitors to come back soon.
They're cleaning up, but they're not closing down. This travel agent in Tenbury Wells has even had some customers coming in to get away from the floods.
We've had inquiries. People have said, you know, when you're a bit more straight, I'll be back next week. So we're aiming for Monday to try and be up and running again. Yeah.
Keith Caldicott's hardware shop was 4 feet underwater in places, and customers have stayed away.
We're probably down, I would say, 70-80% what we are normally. We haven't actually shut, so people have been coming in and walking through all the mess, but yeah, so we're trying to keep going.
And locals in the town are rallying round.
We've had an enormous amount of support. It's been quite overwhelming on occasion in terms of the support we've had, kind words, people turning up with gifts and flowers and so on. And it's been absolutely wonderful, really has been wonderful.
In Upton upon Severn, the waters didn't breach the flood defences. It's business as usual. There's a tendency to think, oh, well, that town's out of bounds. Not true.
It's certainly not true in the case of Upton. Some of the other towns up north have just suffered terribly, and our hearts go out to them. But we're just so lucky here. We got the flood defences built, and in 2012, I think it was, and they've held out ever since. It got close this time, but they're still holding.
What would you say to people?
Please come and look at the river. Look at the amazing flood defences we have here. Look at the amazing job the Environment Agency is doing. They've just been stunning over the last couple of weeks. Really, really could not do enough for us.
Kyle Hassel has a prime position for his restaurant.
There's a lot of local independent businesses down here. None of us are chained. We're all family, independently owned. So it is important people come and still assume trade as normal. We're open as normal, normal products, normal opening hours. Come and support us. Come and have a look at the river. You can see how fast it's moving. You can see that it's quite nice to look at, although it's very scary.
But for now, the danger's past. Mark Goff, ITV News.
Yes, the message there to support our local cities and towns. And while the clear-up continues, many will be wondering if there's more to come. Well, our weather presenter Des Coleman has spent the day in Worcester. And weather-wise, Des, it's been an historic week, but for the wrong reasons.
No, you're absolutely right, Sam. It's incredible, as a matter of fact. The Environment Agency has issued over 600 flood alerts and warnings. And I'm currently standing on the bridge that spans Worcester. At midnight tonight, because of the flow of water, they're going to stop traffic to affect repairs. And I'm speaking across at the cricket ground to Paul Phillips. He's been the stadium manager there for over 30 years. He's never seen it so bad. He showed me the playing fields, and they are underneath 7 feet. That's 2 meters of water. But earlier on today, I was speaking to some of the people in Worcester to find out how they were coping with the flood. So let's take a look.
We spend thousands of pounds on flood defences. It's not working at all. So I don't know what they're going to do next.
How does that make you feel?
Quite angry.
Just coming to work, they've been delayed really bad. So we're getting we fundraise, you see, and it's just getting in territory pretty late. So we haven't been able to speak to as much people as we normally should on a typical day.
It's a pain, obviously, but luckily where we live, we don't get too badly affected. So, but it is a pain where if you do work in the centre, it comes to a total standstill.
They put a little footbridge outside New Road where the water was coming up by the cricket ground, but I couldn't go over that because this is too wide. So I was stuck, had to turn around and go back.
We really have had a phenomenal week of weather. We've seen Storm Ciara giving us 90-mile-an-hour winds, then Storm Dennis, the second half, gave us that really intensive burst of wet weather that caused all the problems. And we saw the mainland UK giving us a weather warning. Incredible pictures and incredible scenes. Let's find out exactly what's happening when it comes to our weather just after this. Now here's a wonderful photo sent in by Pat. You can actually see Worcester Racecourse in the background. In the foreground, an intense amount of flooding, but fortunately to put a bit of a happier tone to a dreary picture, we've got that wonderful rainbow in the background. Let's find out though how we describe our weather over the course of today, and it's very simple. We woke up, it was bright, it started clouding over, and it was very mild. Now why are we getting all this weather? It's down to the jet stream. You can see the difference in air temperature in the Americas, the cold air and the warm air. That's really driving, intensifying that jet stream, and it meanders as it goes across the Atlantic Ocean. When it sinks towards the southern part of the UK, it pulls in cold air. When it moves towards the north, it pulls in mild air. But underneath all that, we've got real turmoil going on. You can see that on the Atlantic chart. Look how tight the isobars are. Frontal systems being associated with that, pushing to our shores, not just into the weekend, but through Monday and Tuesday as well. So when it comes to our weather story for tonight, quite a benign night as a matter of fact. It's a mainly dry night with frontal systems always sweeping in from the west and from the north, but they don't really come across our shores. What we will find out is a fair amount of hill fog. Temperatures 8 degrees, very mild for the time of year, and we keep those mild temperatures as you wake up tomorrow morning. So tomorrow morning, it's a nice bright start. Very quickly though, it will start to cloud over, the cloud thick enough to give us a few showers to the far north of our patch. We'll notice the wind speeds, gusts of up to 45 miles an hour, temperatures about 12 degrees. Quickly onto the outlook, and what we do see is that when we do get to Monday and Tuesday, we see a continuation of that unsettled weather. Further afield than that, there is a bit of a respite. Things are feeling much calmer. And unsettled weather, like I said, is on its way. It's a wonder how these people are going to cope. But from a very waterlogged Worcestershire, I'll hand it back to Matt and Sam.
Thanks, Des, and that is almost it from us. There is a full roundup of the day's other news on our website, including that terrific European win for Wolves. However, for everyone affected by the flooding, this is the end of a week we'll never forget. The Midlands looks like it never has before, and it'll take weeks, months, and for some even years to get back to normal.
Well, what struck us is the level of gratitude and admiration there is for the people who've pitched in to help. To them, we'd like to say thank you, and to you for watching. Bye-bye.